Hi, welcome to Photography West Gallery. My name is Julia Christopher. I'm the director. Come on in. So for those of you who haven't been here before, we're coming up on our 40th anniversary. This month is Women's History Month. We are having a women's photography show, which I will be doing an episode on later. But the owner of this gallery, Carol Williams, believe it or not, was the first single woman in the United States to be approved for an SBA startup loan in 1980. Wonderful accomplishment. We are still here 40 years later. That said, 500 people came to our opening. It was October 27th, 1980. It was a show for Brett Weston, featured in this wonderful photograph by Martha Casanave here. But they didn't really think that a photography gallery was a viable business, but here we are. And Ansel Adams also came to our opening, and the first thing he did was tap on the glass and inform us that the #1 cause of damage to his photography was improper framing. So he made sure we knew how to frame. He said always use optically high-grade acrylic, always use metal frames, never wood, and for the same reason, because there's acid in wood and cardboard, not to use cardboard. A few years ago, I actually had a client come in with an Ansel Adams Yosemite portfolio that he had left in the cardboard portfolio case since 1959. Needless to say, I opened it up and all of the photographs had turned yellow. By the time I got to the bottom where the branches and snow was, it looked like somebody had just dumped coffee all over it. It was heartbreaking. So if you have any questions about how to properly frame or store photographs, please let me know. But here we have some beautiful Kenro Izus. Believe it or not, this is the actual size of the negatives that he's working with. The first time I met him, he told me that 8x10 format was too small. I'll never forget it. That said, with this process, whatever size your film is, that's going to be the size of the photograph. You can't do any enlargements. This is an image of his camera. Custom built 1420 Deerdorf. I will be doing a segment on him as well. And then this is Cottonwood Light by Christopher Burkett. It is the largest Cibachrome photograph ever handmade by a photographer in the history of photography. His work is absolutely wonderful, and PBS did a fantastic news hour segment on him a couple of years ago. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend watching it. They go in his darkroom and show him making one of these, which is really important because they stopped making Cibachrome, I want to say in 2011, and he told me they actually disassembled the machine and sold it for parts. So it's really gone. He's down to the last 30% of the material now. So I'm really grateful to PBS for doing that segment so that it can be preserved, that process in history. So as we move on, here is our Brett Weston room. Here we have a couple of Morley Bear 8x10 contacts, which he loved Agfa Portriga Rapid paper. It had this beautiful warm tone to it. And then in here we have some of our Brett Westons. As I mentioned, he was our opening exhibition and fundamental to the founding of this gallery. And these large 20x24 murals were the largest he ever made in his career. Carol actually convinced him to completely rebuild his darkroom in 1989 to do this series. She loved Ansel Adams' 20x24 murals, and she said, Brett, you can't die with your largest size being 1620. So she twisted his arm and he did them. Needless to say, after he completed the portfolio, he retired the negatives, punched holes in them, and that was the end of that. This one is Mendenhall Glacier, 1973. He called that his 20-year photograph because he first went to Mendenhall in the 1950s and he didn't bring his camera and he swore he'd go back to photograph. This is very important in the history of photography because of the use of negative space. Brett was the first person in the history of photography to ever use negative space as a subject in a photograph. But the two-dimensional spatial layering in this photograph as well predates David Hockney, by over a decade. So wonderful photograph. Here are Ansel Adams' room. I do have some Ansel Adams and will be doing a segment on him as well. However, at the moment, it's also kind of turned into our contemporary black and white photographer room. These are all by Roman Lawrence, who is an incredibly talented contemporary photographer, originally from Poland, but he moved to Modesto in the early 80s and thought it was the most beautiful place he'd ever seen. Took these wonderful photographs in the Central Valley, which is very important in the history of photography on the West Coast, because no one photographed there. Ansel Adams said there was nothing to photograph in the Central Valley, and boy did Roman prove him wrong. Here we have a mural-sized Ansel Adams from Phyllis Donahue's private collection. Phyllis was Ansel's longest-term employee. She worked for him for 20 years. She was his spotter. So what that means is when you go in the darkroom with a negative and before you load it in the enlarger, this inevitably happens. A little itty-bitty piece of dust will fall on the negative, and when you make the photograph, it shows up as a little white dot. And Phyllis's job was to go in with some spotting ink and a little itty-bitty paintbrush and spot in all the little white dots for Ansel. So if it wasn't for Phyllis, there'd be white dots all over all the Ansel Adams photographs. So we're very grateful to her for all of her hard work. And then I do have another Ansel Adams over here and a few others that I will be showing you later. These two are by William Scott, who's working with medium format Hasselblad. Beautiful, beautiful darkroom craftsmanship based out of the North Bay. And then Alexei Tidorenko is a Russian photographer who now lives out of New York. He too is working with a Hasselblad. This one I framed so you can see kind of the edges of the negative. But his darkroom craftsmanship, I've never seen anyone do quite what he does. He'll go in with farmer's reducer, bleach, and sepia toner, also 14 karat gold and selenium, and just spot tone certain areas. So all the color in this is actually coming from wet chemistry. None of our photographers are again, doing digital. It's all wet process. On that note, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the tour of the gallery, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you have any questions, you can always email me at julia@photographywest.com or leave a comment. And thanks again. Stay tuned.